The last time we were here, I think, Mr. Nell, you had closed your case?
We did indeed, my lady.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Roux?
Thank you, my lady. First of all, in terms of Section 151, Sub 1 of the Criminal Procedure Act, dealing with the defence's address to the court for purposes of the case to be presented on behalf of the accused. My lady, and learned assessors, the following evidence will be adduced on behalf of the accused. It's 1, evidence of wound ballistics, urine content and gastric emptying. 2, evidence on merits. 3, evidence relevant, again, to wound ballistics, cricket bat damage to the toilet door, sound, prosthetic marking, lighting, visibility. 4, evidence relevant to the events on 14 February 2013. And 5, evidence relevant to vulnerability. And lastly, my lady, it's anticipated that between 14 and 17 witnesses will testify. I have a document. It should not be marked as an exhibit. It's just setting out what I've just read into the record for convenience and for no other reason, my lady.
Thank you. Thank you.
My lady, I've then indicated before that a special request would be made to call Dr. Botha first. It is because of family health reasons. He's the only witness that will be called, so to speak, out of order.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my lady.
Yes. That request, there's no objection to the request? Thank you very much. Yes, you may.
Thank you. I'm indebted to the court.
The witness may be sworn in.
Please state your full names for the record.
Jan Botha, Jan Botha.
Do you have any objection in taking the prescribed oath?
No, I do not.
You consider the prescribed oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Witness is sworn in, my lady.
Thank you very much. Dr. Botha, you may be seated if you so wish.
I prefer to stand, thank you.
Thank you.
And lady, in terms of the court order, it will only be audio recording and not visual recording in respect of this witness.
Yes. Just to make sure that everyone understands, only audio is allowed, not the visuals. That includes still photographs while the witness is in the witness box. Thank you.
Thank you, my lady. Professor Botha, I make available to you a curriculum vitae. Could you look at that and confirm the correctness of that?
I confirm the contents, my lady.
My lady, I ask the court to accept it as Exhibit FFF.
FFF.
Dr. Botha, just to summarize your curriculum vitae, what are your qualifications?
My lady, I have an MB-CHB from the University of Cape Town.
And when did you obtain that?
1969. I have a Master of Medicine in Anatomical Pathology from the same university. I have the Fellowship of the College of Pathologists in Anatomical Pathology, and I have the Fellowship of the College of Forensic Pathologists of South Africa. And I've been registered as a specialist pathologist since 1975.
Could you also just summarize your duties as a pathologist, where you worked before, and in what capacity?
My lady, I worked at Curtis Skeer Hospital from the time I qualified until 1979. I was then in private practice in Johannesburg from 1979 to 1985. I was then appointed state pathologist in Southwest Africa and Namibia for 2 years, following which I was chief state pathologist for the province of KwaZulu-Natal and professor and head of the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Natal from 1988 to 1995. And following that, I was chief state pathologist for the Free State province and head of the Department of Forensic Medicine there until my mandatory retirement in 2010.
Have you ever given evidence in court in respect of being as being a pathologist?
I have, my lady.
On how many occasions?
I have no idea, my lady. It's on thousands of occasions.
And have you conducted any post-mortems?
I have. It's an essential part of my duties as a pathologist.
Do you know how many post-mortems you've conducted?
Lady, I think I've probably done about 25,000. I've supervised many more, and of those I estimate 5,000 to 6,000 were cases involving shootings.
Have you ever been involved in wound ballistics?
Yes, my lady, it's an essential part of the duties of a forensic pathologist.
What does that entail?
It's basically the study of the effects of a projectile in human tissue.
Do you have
the
any
injuries it causes and the effects thereof.
I'm not going to qualify you as a ballistic expert, of course, but do you have any knowledge of firearms?
My lady, in the course of the work we do, we have to have a basic understanding of firearms, how they function, but a forensic pathologist is not a ballistic expert per se, not by any manner of means.
Professor, there was evidence by Professor Simon about gastric emptying.
That is correct, my lady.
You have had the opportunity to read through his evidence?
I have.
Now, when we consulted you, referred me to a number of articles relevant to gastric emptying from a forensic point of view.
That is correct.
I want to make available those articles so you can identify them, and then we'll deal with them. For housekeeping purposes, may the articles be marked, maybe combined as exhibit triple G, my lady, GGG.
Have Martin.
Thank you, my lady. Now, you are going to refer to some of the publications. Professor, before you do so, from your perspective, what is the position with determining death, the time of death with reference to gastric emptying?
My lady, a lot of work was done on this in the past. The modern consensus is that it is a highly controversial and inexact science, if one wants to call it that. If one looks at the older textbooks, they give varying times for emptying of the stomach after a so-called light meal, a medium meal, and a heavy meal, although they don't really define what is a light meal or a medium meal, etc. And the general consensus was that in most people, a light meal would be emptied in about 2 to 3 hours, a medium meal 3 to 5 hours, and a heavy meal significantly longer. All the books virtually warn of the dangers and the variations, not only from person to person, but in the same person from day to day, the variations in gastric emptying that can occur as a result of differences in the composition of the meal, the calorie content of the meal, the volume of the meal, psychological factors, medications, and so on. There was a landmark case in Canada, I think it was 1963, the so-called Truscott case, which threw this whole thing under the magnifying glass. It was a highly controversial case, and since then, if I can put it this way, the enthusiasm for using gastric emptying as a yardstick to determine the interval between the last meal and the time of death has waned considerably. The more recent textbooks point out the dangers of using experimental evidence and extrapolating this to the forensic situation. Both Knight and Paulson have emphasized that much of the experimental work has been done using porridge-like material labeled with radioisotopes or some other substance. And Knight says that one can hardly equate this with a modern mixed meal. Knight actually goes further in the third edition of his book. He says an exercise of this nature to determine the interval between time of death and the last meal based on gastric emptying is irrelevant. Those are the words he uses. So I think while one can say, yes, there are general trends, to extrapolate those general trends to a specific case, I think is very hazardous. One cannot be adamant about something which is actually in the realms of speculation.
You're aware that there was also consultation with a specialist anaesthetist that, if necessary, will give evidence from a different perspective.
I'm aware of that,
yes.
my lady.
Now, you have referred now to some names, and just to put them in perspective, you have in front of you extracts of certain of the textbooks, and I want you to look at it and maybe just for the benefit of the court, highlight some of the aspects in that to demonstrate what you've just testified about.
The first article is from a fairly recent textbook, Forensic Medicine, Clinical and Pathological Aspects, by Payne, James, Basittle and Smock, where they again state basically what I've already said. They give varying times, they review some articles, but they again warn of trying to be dogmatic about the time interval between the last meal and death using gastric emptying. The next article from an older textbook, Gordon, Shapiro and Burson, where they give a time of 3 to 4 hours, and they warn that there are other factors affecting the gastric emptying, including gastric motility, consistency of the gastric contents, the osmotic pressure of the gastric contents, and the quantity of material in the duodenum. Third article is from Knight's book on forensic pathology. This is arguably the most widely used and respected textbook on general pathology in the English-speaking world. And he starts off his section headed Gastric Emptying as a Measure of Time Since a Death. He says, with one exception, this controversial topic could be dismissed summarily as being quite irrelevant. For many years, pathologists have argued over the reliability of the state of digestion of gastric contents as an indicator of the time between the last meal and death. The leading cases in modern times being that of Truscott in Canada. There is now almost a consensus that with extremely circumscribed exceptions, the method is too uncertain to have much validity. He then states his reasons for this particular comment. The next article is from The Essentials of Forensic Medicine by Paulson, G. and Knight. They also warn of the dangers of using experimental evidence. He gives a rough guide, but again, issues a caveat of the problems involved in trying to come to a fixed time. Gradwell's Legal Medicine, which was edited by Francis Camps, who was Professor of Forensic Medicine at the University of London, simply states, the rate of emptying of the stomach is so variable that it cannot be used to give any certain indication of the time that has elapsed between the last meal and death. And he follows up with a short paragraph. And then De Mayo and De Mayo give gastric emptying times, again issuing a warning of the dangers of being too specific.
Would those warnings accord with your experience and what is contained in those articles, publications?
Lady, it is very difficult for a forensic pathologist to gain expertise in this field. We do an autopsy, we observe the gastric contents, the amount, the nature, and we usually have a fairly accurate idea of the time of death. However, we rarely have any information regarding the time of the last meal, the nature of the food, the volume of the food, the psychological status of the patient, of the deceased. Did the deceased take any medication? If one wants to gain expertise in this field from a purely forensic point of view, one would have to embark on a prospective study where you do the autopsies, you then interview the family or next of kin and gain the necessary background information and then analyze it. So basically we are in a position to observe. We aren't really in a position to come to any deductions or conclusions because we haven't got all the facts in front of us.
I see by looking at the publications that one step that advises the opening of the duodenum.
My lady, different pathologists have different techniques. Some do open the entire gastrointestinal tract. I do. Others don't. I, again, don't open the ureters. Others do. It might give you some information as to how much of the gastric content has passed into the small bowel. The problem is whether you can, at that stage, still recognize the nature of the food in the upper and middle levels of the small bowel. Yes, it would be advisable, but it, again, is a difficult thing to assess accurately. I wouldn't say that by examining the duodenal contents, you will say that all of this was the result of food, or represents food that was passed through the stomach fairly recently.
You also had occasion to look at the articles in Professor Simon's file that he made available. We don't have to refer to it in particular. Did you read through that?
Yes, I did, my lady.
And your view on that?
Well, they all represent experimental work. And again, as I said, it is very difficult to extrapolate that to the human situation in a forensic context.
I think in all fairness that Professor Simon made it clear that he did not use the articles in order to come to a finding.
Yes.
And that would make good sense to you.
Yes.
As a pathologist, would you know, for instance, the time of the last meal? Unless you advised.
We would not be aware of that. If the investigating officer thought it was of importance, he or she might bring it to the attention of the pathologist. But I don't recall ever having been approached by an investigating officer with the information of the last meal and being asked to take that into consideration in my post-mortem examination.
Do you have information about the volume of the last meal?
No. No, my lady.
Do you have information of the person himself or herself about the neurological, emotional, or hormonal interactions?
No, my lady. We occasionally do get some information about medication that the deceased was taking, but we rarely get that other information. We might be told that the person was involved in an argument or a fight or was assaulted beforehand or something like that, something which may have a psychological component, but that's the exception.
Well, I'm putting these factors to because should it be necessary for the further expert to give evidence, it will be the evidence that those factors must be taken into account in any event.
Yes, that is.
And that one cannot venture any guess without that.
Yes, that is so.
Would you have any information about the health of the person, other than the one that caused the death?
We would get that occasionally, my lady, certainly not routinely.
Would you have any information about the medication taken, which would include, for instance, appetite suppressants and so on, and the effects of that?
Well, lady, I think given the context in which autopsies are done today, we'd be extremely fortunate to obtain such information at the time of the examination.
Was there anything in the post-mortem report with regard to toxicology that could assist?
No. No.
Why is that?
My lady, the time interval between doing an autopsy and getting toxicology results usually runs into several years. Had full toxicology been sent off immediately, I would not, under normal circumstances, expect it to be available within a year of the autopsy.
Professor Simon at the end came to not an absolute conclusion, but he suggested that the last meal could have been between an hour or two before the death. What do you say about that? As
Lady,
a
it
pathologist.
could have been an hour or two. It could have been considerably longer, in my opinion.
Is there any way that you can, with some degree of accuracy, determine that?
I do not believe so.
Now, the next topic that I will deal with is that of wound ballistics. And to understand your evidence, you were asked to look at the evidence of Captain Mangena and also his report.
That is correct, my lady.
You also had access to the post-mortem photographs.
That is correct.
Do you have, could you form any view about the chronology or the sequence of the wounding of the deceased?
My lady, I think I have a reasonably accurate idea of what happened. I base this on the position of the bullet holes in the door, the location of the gunshot injuries to the deceased, the possible effects of those injuries, and photographs of the toilet area.
And what is your view on that?
I think, in all probability, the first shot that struck the deceased was the one over the right hip. I believe that she was standing with the body slightly flexed forward, hence the eccentric collar of abrasion around the entry wound over the right hip, and that she was also fairly close to the door. This would account for the splinter injuries on the dorsal surface of the right arm and I think there were also 1 or 2 small punctate wounds around the entry wound. I think that is the first gunshot wound.
If I may say, that was also the view of Captain Mangena.
Yes, that is correct.
These.
I think what then happened is that with the injury to the right ilium or hip bone, the integrity of the pelvic girdle was lost, and the right hip joint became totally unstable, and this would have resulted in the deceased falling down, possibly in a more flexed position, in almost a reflex reaction to the injury over the hip. And I think the second shot was the one that struck her over the right arm, shattering the humerus and emerging posteriorly, and also causing the superficial abrasions over the right lower chest wall.
Could you see on the relevant photographs any secondary wounds in the vicinity of the arm?
There are secondary wounds again, which suggests that she was fairly close to the door. The secondary wounds being the result of splinter damage from the door itself.
And then?
My lady, I suspect, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that the third shot was the one which injured the left hand and then hit the toilet wall, ricocheting off the tiles. I think by this time she had dropped considerably, she had turned, and the left hand was probably over the right side of the body. The bullet missed the torso, missed the head, but went through the web of 2 of the fingers of the left hand. I think she then fell down. She fell against the magazine rack. She certainly didn't fall on top of the magazine rack. And it was in this position, while falling against, she fell down, and as she was going down against the magazine rack, she incurred the last shot to the right side of the head.
Now, 2 things in Captain Mangena's evidence. The one is that, according to him, she was sitting on the magazine rack before according to him, the shot to the arm and the shot to the head. What do you say about that?
I think that is highly...
Let's start with the shot to the arm, and if you can explain that.
My lady, had she been sitting on the magazine rack, I think firstly she would have been too high, and secondly I would have expected blood spatters on the tiles above the magazine rack. If one looks at the photographs, there's no blood in that position, and apparently there was no blood in the magazine rack, and there was no blood on the magazines within the rack. There were some blood spatters on the front of the magazine rack. So I do not believe that she was sitting on the magazine rack.
If you look at the secondary wounds to the arm, how would that reconcile with the back wall of the toilet?
I think she would be too far from the door to have incurred those splinter injuries.
But the ballistic evidence will be to that effect. Yes. Would she have been able to lift her right arm in order to protect herself?
Certainly not, my lady. The effect of the shot to the arm was almost akin to that of a traumatic amputation. The humerus, the long bone of the upper arm, had been shattered. There would almost certainly have been injuries to both the 3 major nerves running through that area, at least some of them, not necessarily all of them, and there would have been vascular injuries to the brachial artery and its branches. She would have had a right lower arm, but not have been capable of functioning at all.
The one point that Captain Mangena placed reliance on was the that he termed as the ricochet marks on the back after deceased. 2 marks that he referred to. You have seen those?
I have, my lady.
What is your view on that?
Professor Simon described them as 2, I think, roughly oval marks over the protuberances, in other words, the spinous processes of the lumbar vertebrae. And if I remember correctly, he said they were about 2 centimeters apart. Now, had this been due to a bullet, a component of the bullet, it certainly couldn't have been the copper jacket. The talons or petals of black talon ammunition would not cause a wound of that nature. It would cause a wound similar to the one seen over the right lower chest. So we can discount the possibility of the jacket causing those 2 lesions. Furthermore, if you look at the higher of the 2 lesions, in the high magnification photographs, we see a series of vertical parallel striations. Now, this could not have been caused by the lead core, because the lead core would be rotating around its long axis as it moves through the air. I'm absolutely confident that these injuries were not caused by a bullet or components of a bullet. They do, however, correlate with the scalloped edges of the magazine rack, where the upper curvature or scallop shows a very distinct wood grain composed of parallel striations. And I believe that these injuries were incurred as she slid down and the area over the spine came into contact with the edge of the magazine rack.
There would be reference to photos by the ballistic experts on the specific topic. You have seen all the photos.
I have, my lady.
And by looking at the photos, that confirm or refute your views on this?
I think it supports my views. If one looks at the photographs, there is no blood on the wall above and behind the magazine rack. Apparently there was no blood in the magazine rack or in the contents of the magazine rack. And if you look underneath the magazine rack, there's also very little blood. The blood is actually on the front of the magazine rack, between the magazine rack and the toilet and on the toilet bowl, and there are blood spatters on the one side of the magazine rack.
Professor, can we deal with the effect of the injuries?
My lady, I think the injury to the hip would have caused immediate instability, and she would have fallen. I'm not sure how much pain she felt, certainly shock and instability. I think she would have fallen and probably fallen slightly to the right. As I said, the injury to the right arm would have resulted in complete non-function of the right lower arm. And I think the injury to the head would have rendered her immediately unconscious and totally incapacitated. And I don't think she survived very long thereafter. If you look at the photographs of the base of the skull and the multiple fractures of all 3 are fossae, the anterior, middle, and posterior fossae at the base of the skull. There are multiple fractures, but there was very little blood in the upper respiratory tract. What normally happens on these injuries, blood seeps down. I don't think she lived long enough for that to happen. So I think death ensued fairly quickly after sustaining the head injury.
But for one witness that put a pause upon hearing noises between shots, and then Captain Mangena saying that you can only reconcile the wounding with a shot, an interval, and then 3 shots in quick succession. What do you say about that?
My lady, whether she was able to make any noise depends on 2 factors. Firstly, the sequence of the shots. If I'm wrong, and if the shot to the head was the first shot, then obviously she couldn't have made any sound at all. If the shots were fired in a rapid sequence, these 4 shots could easily have been discharged within the space of 4 seconds. I think it's highly unlikely that she would have made or would have been able to call out. I think after the first shot hit her, one can only imagine the emotions. She would have been, I think, a combination of shock, panic, fear, possibly pain. And I think before she would be in a position to react to that, the remaining the remaining bullets would have struck her. I don't think there was, in other words, if the shots were discharged very rapidly within 4 or 5 seconds, I don't think she would have called out. I don't think so. I can't exclude it. If there was a longer interval between the shots, yes, then it's possible. But not if they were fired in very rapid succession.
Would there have been voluntary movement on her side after sustaining the first shot to the hip?
Yes, she would have been able to move. She hadn't lost consciousness, but how much coordinated movement she could have performed under those circumstances is pure speculation.
What would on her voluntary movements, what would the effect of the wound to the hip have done?
My lady, I think under the circumstances, in that short space of time after incurring those wounds, movements would have been largely of a reflexive nature.
What does that mean?
It would have been involuntary. For example, she might have doubled over after being shot in the hip on an involuntary basis because of the shock, possibly early pain. In other words, she couldn't help it.
And moving backwards?
It was an unconscious movement.
And moving backwards?
I don't think she would have been in control of such a movement, my lady.
You have also seen the evidence of Professor Simon on the urine content, that it was, so to speak, a teaspoonful of urine in the bladder. What does that indicate to you?
My lady, a normal individual in the normal temperature conditions, without any exercise or without any preceding dehydration, produces about 1,400 milliliters of urine a day, which works out to roughly 60 milliliters per hour. If there was no urine, virtually no urine, in the bladder, then I believe that she must have voided her bladder very shortly before she died.
Thank you, my lady. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Neil?
May it please the court, my lady, I will carry on. As you know, we don't receive statements and or information about the witness, but I'll carry on until such time that I need to consult with Professor Simon.
Thank you.
Professor Botha, do you know Dr. Perumal?
Yes, I do.
You know that he was at the post-mortem.
I believe so.
Did you consult with him?
No.
Did you see his report?
I've seen his report.
So you've seen his report?
Yes, I have.
We haven't. So you used his report in getting to your conclusion?
I did not use his report at all in reaching my conclusion.
Why not? Why did you see it? What did you see it for?
I received a copy of Professor Simon's report and...
Not Simon, Perumal.
I received a copy of Professor Simon's report and Dr. Perumal's report.
Now, did you use Dr. Perumal's report in reaching your conclusions?
No, I certainly didn't.
Did you discard it?
Yes.
So he was wrong?
No, my lady, I discarded it because Professor Simon's report was far more detailed.
Now, was there anything in Perumal's report that supported your findings?
My lady, I think Perumal's report was basically the same as Professor Simon's, except Professor Simon's report was more detailed.
You don't answer the question. You've given evidence thousands of times. The question is here easy. Did you use something in Perumal's report to support your conclusion?
Lady, I thought I made it quite clear. I did not use Perumal's report in any way. I used Professor Simon's.
So I'm going to repeat the question. So you never used Perumalus' report in any way. Is that what you're saying?
No. Coming to my conclusions, I did not.
Yeah. But obviously you looked at Professor Simon's evidence.
I did.
And you looked at Captain Mangena's evidence.
I did, my lady.
And you must also agree that Professor Simon, having been there, having seen the stomach content, would be in a better position than you, only relying on photographs of what that contained and what it looked like.
Yes, my lady. The photographs are explicit. I think he described the contents. But yes, he was there. I was not.
Yes. You would. There's just one aspect that I want to deal with immediately. Are you drawing any conclusions from the collar of abrasion on the hip wound?
The only conclusion I'm drawing is that she was not in an erect position when that bullet struck her. Otherwise, the collar of abrasion would have been concentric. It was eccentric. Therefore, she must have been in a flexed position.
Please, Professor, just think about this. And I'm going to challenge you, after I put this to you, to bring me any literature that would indicate that you can make any conclusion from a collar of abrasion after it's gone through intermediate target like a solid door. Are you saying that you're thinking away the solid door?
I'm not thinking away the solid door, my lady. If you look at the central perforation over the hip, that is perfectly concentric. The collar of abrasion is eccentric. In wound ballistics, we would regard that as evidence of a bullet that struck the body at an angle. That's the only conclusion one can draw, and the logical conclusion from that is that the body was probably slightly flexed.
I'm going to challenge you, Doctor, to bring me, and we'll stand down because I feel so strong about that. Bring me any publication where somebody would support you that you can make conclusions from a collar of abrasion after it passed through a solid object, intermediate target. Will you be able to do that, Professor? I say no.
What was the answer?
Would you be able to do it, Doctor?
Lady, I don't offhand know of any publication that deals with this. This is regarded as basic wound ballistics. Collar of abrasion means the bullet struck the body at an angle. What made it strike at an angle is another matter. If you can prove to me or indicate to me that the passage to the door might have caused it to go through an angle, fine. But it didn't. What I'm saying is it did not strike the body while the deceased was standing absolutely erect.
No, Doctor. No, Professor. What you're saying is the projectile didn't hit her square on. That's what you're saying. You're not saying that she wasn't upright. Because if that projectile through the door lost its balance, that would have caused the collar of abrasion as well.
I disagree with that, my lady, because if the bullet had been destabilized, it would have caused an irregular entry wound.
It caused an irregular collar of abrasion. You agree with that?
It caused an eccentric collar of abrasion.
Being irregular in shape. That's what was in the post-mortem. The collar of abrasion was of irregular shape. If that is so?
I disagree with that. If one looks at the photograph, I think that's a fairly regular, eccentric collar of abrasion. But it's a matter of semantics.
No, it's not, Professor. I hear that you've really studied Professor Simon's post-mortem. In his post-mortem, he said the collar of abrasion was of irregular shape. What do you say about that?
Did he mean irregular in the sense that it was concentric, my lady? In what context is the term irregular being used?
In his post-mortem. You studied it. He said it's irregular.
But does that irregularity mean it's not concentric? That it's eccentric? It's a matter of terminology. What do you mean by irregular?
Professor, you've given evidence in hundreds of cases. I ask questions, you answer. So I'm not answering your question.
My lady, I can't answer questions
Then you say
which
you can't.
I do not understand.
Hold on,
It's
Mr. Nell.
fine.
Hold on. Let the
It is said that it was irregular. In what sense was it irregular, my lady? Was it irregular because it wasn't concentric? Was it irregular because the margins differed considerably?
We'll deal with that. Professor, you've now studied Professor Simon's evidence about the gastric content. He never fixed a specific time that she had a last meal. Do you agree with that?
He didn't give a specific time. He said, if I remember correctly, at the end of his evidence, within 2 hours.
Yes. Now, at page 517, my lady, I've summarized it, but what I've summarized is from page 517 of the record. And I want you to just listen to it and say if you agree or not. He said, it's not an exact science. You agree with that?
I do.
Okay. He said there may be inter-individual and intra-individual factors that one has to take into account. You agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. But he said there have been fairly good timelines which have been established from a physiological perspective based on the need to know when it would be safe to administer anesthetics and to operate upon a person. You agree that
I
there's
agree
time?
with that.
Okay. He said one will have to take into account the type of food and the volume of food
I
to
agree
get
with
to
that.
Okay. He also said that at the time of death, the physical process of digestion does not stop. You agree with that?
Well, lady, I'm not certain of that. Most of the textbooks say it does not stop. Other people argue that if the body is refrigerated, the digestive process probably stops. I can't express an opinion.
Yeah. So you rather not have an opinion, so you have to agree with Professor Simon saying that the enzymes would ensure that the
No, my lady, I don't have to agree with anyone. I have an open mind.
Yeah, you don't have to. That's true. You don't have to. But then what he said, Professor, is that's page 539.
It's page.
Page 539, my lady.
Thank you.
He said, I can offer the court as a summation of my entire experience in this field and my reading of the literature and my anecdotal observation. Carries on. He said, I would suggest that we are dealing with a period of approximately 2 hours. You say he's wrong.
No, my lady, I thought I made it quite clear. I said he might be right, he might be wrong. I said I can't say that it was in 2 hours, or I think it said 5 hours.
Good. So you're not saying he's wrong. He's saying, I used my experience, I used what I saw, my view is 2 hours. You say, you don't know if he's wrong, but it could be.
Yes.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Then, I didn't think you'll give evidence on the sequence of the shots, but let's go through that. If you talk about sequence of shots, there's the door. We have it marked A, B, C, and D. Have you worked out which one hit her in the hip?
No.
Didn't.
No.
How could
I can't do that. I can only work on the rough position of the height of the shots and the injuries. I'm not a ballistics expert, my lady.
No, but even on the height, you gave a version. I know, you gave a version on the sequence of the shots. So it's important for you to know which of those wounds could have hit her in the hip.
Yes.
You don't care about that.
No, it's not. I said I'm not in a position to indicate with any certainty whether A, B, C, or D was the one that caused.
But Professor, really, if you want to tell the court, give the court your expert opinion on the sequence of wounds, why do you leave out the most important piece of the
Because,
puzzle?
my lady, it's obvious I'm not a ballistician. I'm a pathologist. I base my opinion on the wound ballistics.
But on wound ballistics, if you don't take the door into account, anything could have happened.
My lady, the grouping on the door is fairly close. Fairly close. I think the difference in height between the highest and the lowest hole is something like 11 centimeters. I can't, in all honesty, say that A was the first shot, B the second shot, and I certainly can't.
If we know that, do you know if one of those missed, you know that one of them missed?
Yes, I'm aware of it.
Which one is that?
I suspect it was either the third or the fourth shot.
Either the third or the fourth. But looking at the door, because that's important to me. Looking at the door, which one missed?
I wouldn't be able to tell them, maybe.
No, but really, for you to know that the third or the fourth missed, you must be able to refer to the door. You gave the evidence, Professor.
My lady, the holes through the door are all roughly the same height. The injuries to the body are all of different heights. The injury to the hip is much lower than the injury to the head, and the injury to the arm is in between. Therefore, one must try and work out a sequence how this happened. She obviously wasn't in the same position when all of these injuries occurred. So you've got to try and work out what was the likely position first, and what position did she then assume, voluntarily or involuntarily, when she was hit a second time and a third time.
See, the most interesting thing is when you started your answer. You said the hip wound was the lowest, the arm wound was in between, and the head wound was the highest. That if she's in an anatomical position.
That is correct.
Yeah. But not in that toilet. You can't say that in the toilet, can you?
No.
Yeah, exactly. That was your answer. You started by saying the hip wound was the lowest, the arm wound was in between, and the head wound was the highest. And you know why, Doctor? Because, Professor, because you don't relate it back to the door. You're talking about the anatomical position. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. But in the toilet, she wasn't standing in an anatomical position.
Well, lady, nobody knows for certain what position she was standing in. All one can say is that the level of the wound, of the bullet holes in the door, and the level of the wound over the right hip would suggest that she was in a standing position.
Now, one thing we know, or let me ask you, how high from the floor was the hip wound?
Lady, I don't have any notes in front of me, but I think it was about 93.
You're right.
93 centimeters.
92, 93, you're right. Now, if we say that on that door, A was 93 centimeters from it. Have a look at A.
Yeah.
You see D is higher.
Yes.
You see C is higher.
Yes.
B is much higher.
Yes.
So let's pick one. Which is the most likely bullet hole to cause the injury on the hip?
Lady, I can't say because I don't know at what angle. I don't know whether the bullet was fired at a perfectly horizontal track or whether the firearm was pointed slightly downwards or slightly upwards.
That's why I'm asking you. You stood there, you gave evidence, you told the court that I know what the sequence of the bullets was.
My lady, I never said that. I said I believe. I didn't say I know. I'm not that presumptuous, Mr. Nell.
Oh, you believe? Let me then rephrase. You, as a professor, said, I believe that the bullets was sustained in the following sequence. That's what you said.
Yes, I believe that.
Now, if I put it to you that A is 93 centimeters from the ground level, the wound was 92 centimeters, the others are higher, would you agree that A caused the hip wound?
I said, could well have, probably.
Probably. I see. If we now, and you see, Professor, I didn't want to take you through this, but you gave the evidence, so I have to. Now, I challenge you. Go stand in there, let A hit you in the hip, and see where you, if you fall. And you said, interesting, you said if she was hit in the right hip, she would have, in all probability, fall towards the right.
Yes, because of instability of the right hip joint, my lady.
But, Professor, please, and I have to take you through it. Look at A. If A hit her in the right hip and she fell, what would happen after? Where would she go to?
She would probably fall backwards.
Indeed. Fall backwards, I agree. That's what Captain Mangena said. Now, that is on scale. I just want to tell you. That's exactly on scale. Now, if she fell backwards, it would be towards the toilet and the magazine rack.
Yes, but I think there would have been when I said she turned, I think what I implied there would be a slight rotational movement. But she would ultimately, with the instability, have fallen backwards.
Now, we have, which arm was it?
It was the right arm.
Right. So we have her falling backwards, and we have a shot to the arm. Which would that be?
I can't say with certainty, because by that time, the body would probably be in a lower position. And as I said, she's falling backwards, and there's probably a slight, or perhaps more than a slight rotational movement. My lady, the problem is that any shooting is a dynamic situation, and to try and work out the movements of the body retrospectively with absolute certainty is almost impossible.
You did it, Professor Botha. Not with certainty, but you came here and you gave evidence. I'm testing your evidence, that's all I'm doing. You put yourself out there, I'm testing you, that's all. So, to say without certainty, it's always difficult. I agree with you. But there is probability if you can recreate a scene, isn't there?
Yes.
No. Now, let's do that. And I'm going to help you. A, we've agreed in probability he turned the hip, the right hip.
Yes.
Okay. B must. Look at the door. You can accept it from me. B hit the back of the tires. Do you have that?
No, it's a possibility.
So the only two that we have to deal with in creating a different version that Captain Mangena gave must be C and D for the right arm and the head wound. Am I right?
Yes, that leaves C and
C. Fine. But the arm, the wound on the arm is interesting because one can link to three things there. The entrance wound, the exit wound, and the injuries below the breast.
That is correct.
Which places her arm away from the breast, away from her body, because it wasn't a contact. Her arm wasn't in contact with the body when the injuries below the breast was formed. Am I right?
Yeah, it was not a short exit wound.
Yeah, great. So what we have is we have the forearm in a raised position, because taking into account the entrance and exit wounds, and close to the chest. Am I right?
Yes.
So that we have. So that must have happened while she's falling on your
I
version.
believe so.
But she would have fallen backward.
Yes.
But then your version on her having been close to the door and the splinters is of no consequence, because she's falling backwards and you don't know where she was when the splinters hit her.
She must have been very close to the door, my lady.
Oh, but you see, Professor, there we go. Must have been. I've taken you through it. A hit her in the hip. She fell backwards. C hit her in the arm. How did that happen? It's impossible.
My lady, I don't understand why it should be impossible. The fact that there were splinters, and the splinters, I assume, came from the door, I don't know where else they could come from, would mean that she was in reasonable proximity to the door. for those splinters to have injured the arm.
On the toilet would be reasonable proximity to look at it?
Well, my lady, to ascertain that, one would have to fire test shots through an identical door using identical ammunition.
You haven't and you don't know. That's
No,
the
I
answer.
don't believe anyone has.
Why are you giving that answer?
I don't recall Captain Magema or anyone firing through the door and testing for splinter injuries.
So whilst you're giving evidence, you're still thinking of what Magena said, which is fair. But you cannot say because you haven't tested it.
No, obviously, I'm not a ballistician.
Okay. So when you gave a view on it, why did you give it if you're not a ballistician?
Lord, my lady, I was interpreting the wound ballistics. I think I've emphasized that on several occasions. I'm not a ballistician. My job is to interpret wound ballistics.
Professor, let us deal with the head wound. Was that close to the door?
I am not aware of any findings to suggest that it was close to the door. I'm not aware of any wood fragments in the hair or any splinter injuries to the face. So that I assume it was not that close to the door.
And if I indicate to you that there was blood spatter and tissue spatter at the back of the wall behind the toilet lid, what would you say?
Then I would say that she must have been she must have been within a reasonable distance from the wall.
And if I put to you that on the toilet lid, this broken hair embedded in tissue, that must mean that her head was at the height of the toilet lid.
I don't understand. If you could just reiterate, please.
Can I show you a photograph? My lady, may I just have a moment? I will just identify the photograph. My lady, may I just confer with the people behind me?
Yes, yes, please do.
Professor, have a look at that photograph. That is the toilet lid. We have broken hair embedded into body tissue. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
That must indicate the head was very close to that area.
I agree.
Yes. So, then we also have, and I will have to show you a photograph one. Let's have a look at that photograph, and I agree with you. You see blood on the toilet seat and inside the toilet. You see that?
I do, my lady.
And blood on the floor.
That is correct.
Now, there's no link or overflow from the toilet seat to the floor. Am I right?
That is correct.
So, would I be correct in saying that the blood came from two wounds?
I would assume that the blood in the toilet was probably from the head wound,
Yes.
and the blood on the floor was most probably from the wound over the right arm.
Yes. Now, if I were to zoom in the corner there, bit more, please, Ben? And take it down a bit, please. You said there were no blood spatter, but there you can see it, isn't it? And body tissue against the wall, am I right?
Yes, I believe I can see in this high magnification scattered blood spatter.
Yeah. So the one conclusion you reach by saying there's no blood spatter at the wall, that wasn't correct. Because now in high magnification you could see blood spatter.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Good. Now, but that would all indicate, Professor, that a head was in that area of the toilet lid when the head was struck. So, if one has to now reconstruct the scene, we have three things that we know. We have A, hit in the hip. We have B, missed. We have a head when the final wound hit her in that area. So the only issue that remains, and we agree with you, in all probability that was the last wound, the head wound, because she would have dropped. That was a totally incapacitating wound.
That is correct.
So there we have it. So in between, we have to fit in C. I'm putting to you on all probability, Captain Mangena is correct. Now, having seen what I showed you, would you agree with that?
Correct in what sense, my lady? That she was sitting on the...
Yes, that because the height of the shots is affixed.
My lady, I then have a problem with the wood splinters around the entrance wound, the punctate wound around the entrance wound of the arm.
But you said you don't know, you're not a ballistics expert, now you want to become a ballistics expert again. 3 questions ago you said you can't make it.
It's not a matter of becoming a ballistics expert, it's a matter of common sense. To get splinters, she must be in reasonable proximity to the door. I said, I don't know how far the splinters could move. Only a ballistics expert, test firing the same ammunition through the same door, can tell that. I would think it's a little bit far.
At your view. If she was at the toilet, if she's less than a meter, if she's on the toilet, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So the toilet is out for you?
No, man, I didn't say it's out. I said I suspect.
Okay. Now, so I take it that you've seen the magazine rack.
Yes.
And the striations you're linked to the magazine rack.
I do, my lady.
On wood grain.
Yes.
I just want to make it clear. Are you saying the striations were caused by the grain of the wood?
No, I think that is the most likely explanation for the striations.
It's not impressions, it's striations.
They look like striations on the high magnification photograph.
Now let us just go to that particular wound and have a look at it. Those are the ones we're talking about?
That is correct.
Well, I have to identify the specific photograph for the court record.
Mm-hmm.
It's 489, my lady.
489.
489. Can we just see it again? Okay. I'm going to ask that we blow up the wound. That we zoom in. A bit more if we can, a bit more. Those are, if I look at it, it's a railway line, a gap, a railway line, a gap, a railway line. Am I right? Is that what you see? Or two, let me say 2 lines, a gap, 2 lines, a gap,
Yes.
2 lines, a gap.
That is correct.
Now, are you telling me that you saw that wood grain on the magazine rack?
I saw similar striations on the magazine rack.
For the magazine rack to have caused a striation, there must be an edge. Am I right? There must be an edge of some sorts to cause a striation.
Yes, that is correct.
So we must accept, and I haven't seen it. I hope we'll see it later, but I haven't. That there must be an edge on the magazine rack that looks like that.
Yes, my lady, the one side is scalloped, and there are two projections. There's a larger one where one sees the grain very clearly, and there is a smaller scalloped protrusion lower down, roughly 2 centimeters lower down.
Okay, let me just get an answer. Did you see that grain pattern as an edge on the magazine rack? That's a question.
I saw parallel grain pattern, a parallel grain pattern on the
We started, Professor, we started by saying the striation is caused by an edge. Remember, we started there.
Yes.
You said yes. I'm asking you, did you see that edge on the magazine rack, yes or no?
Yes, I saw striations.
An edge that could have caused it.
Yes,
An
I
edge.
believe so. Yes.
You believe? The hair is still intact. The hair is still there.
Yes.
Would a
that is so.
striation not have removed it?
Not necessary.
What?
Lady, if you fall and you braid your skin, you don't remove all the hair necessarily. It's the same principle. This is a frictional movement that caused this type of injury. You don't necessarily denude the skin of all the hair.
But it's likely that striation would have removed the hair.
It's possible.
No, let's forget possible. Because the question I asked you, you gave evidence thousands of times. The word's likely.
I say it's possible, my lady. Maybe that will be satisfactory.
Doctor, Professor, I ask you again. And I find it very strange that I have to ask you questions 3 times. Being an expert, having given evidence thousands of times. Is it likely that you would expect the hair to be removed?
Not necessarily, my lady.
I'm using the word likely. And I want you to answer that question.
It is possible, yeah, or it is likely.
Good. Why do we struggle to get the answer? Professor.
My lady, I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. But it's very difficult to answer questions when the waters are being muddied.
No water's been muddied. You gave the evidence. I'm testing you. Professor, you cannot say that I'm not testing your version. I'm testing your version. Am I right? You gave that evidence.
Yes.
I'm not unfair. I'm testing it. Am I right?
Yes, my lady.
Okay. So then answer the questions. Professor, may I perhaps now have that adjournment to enable me to consult with Professor Simon, and we'll take the cross-examination after
How
that.
much time do you need?
Melanie, may I just find out what the time is? Melanie, may I suggest we take an early tea and come back at 11:15?
We'll be back at 11:15.
That's good, please.
Dank u wel, wij doen dat bedankt.